The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Today we have a really exciting follow-up program with Robin Aisha Lansong, just returned from Zimbabwe. Robin is a multiple near-death survivor. In 1977, when Robin was 8 years old, an American man abducted her and took her to Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. He eventually abandoned her there, but she was taken in and cared for by the people of a small tribal village. Now, Robin is here to continue the story of her personal quest to understand what happened to her there when she was kidnapped. If you haven't already listened to part one of Robin's story, and her description of her NDE when she nearly died, I suggest you check out our past shows button at NDE Radio for her interview of March 6th, 2017. Robin, welcome back to NDE Radio.
Hi, Lee. It's good to hear your voice.
Oh, it's wonderful to hear yours. Oh, you've got to tell us about this trip. I was enthralled with some of the descriptions, especially the one that John wrote, your husband, about as you were traveling toward the farm you were going to stay at the Limpopo River, and how you were beginning to recognize landmarks, and then suddenly this donkey cart appeared. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. It was an incredible moment. So this was my first return trip in 40 years to now Zimbabwe. I had been there at 8 years old in 1977. And what was really kind of overall remarkable for me is that I've been holding all this as memory for 40 years. And so to go back and meet the people again, be on the land again, find the exact locations, shifted something for me that I still hardly have words for. We've only been back about 2.5 weeks. And so the moment we had been there about 4 days, and we kind of chose to stay in a place not quite at the key location. But as we were driving into the key location where the village is that the people took me in and where all the events of war happened, where I had my near-death experience, as we were coming in, we're driving in a vehicle on a very bumpy dirt road, very, like, lots of kind of potholes and kind of difficult to navigate. And coming out, I had seen a 4-minute video of Mayamu, and so I knew that she was the one who was part of the second family that took care of me. And I think she had not seen a picture of me as an adult. I don't believe anybody had shown her that. So we were driving into where we were going to be staying right next to the lands where she lives. And again, this donkey cart is coming towards us. Since John's in the front seat, he spots her and says to Vanessa, who's our host, "Is that Mayamu?" So Vanessa stops the vehicle. Their donkey cart stops. We both literally get out of our vehicles and run to each other. 40 years we haven't seen each other. She doesn't speak English. I don't speak Venda. And we embrace. And she's a strong woman, and she practically picks me off my feet. And the validation and the homecoming and the reunion that ran through my whole body, I was speechless. I was weeping. And then she kind of, stopped rocking me so much, and she was petting my head and saying, "Sorry, sorry, sorry." And then she bent me forward and she checked my head where the gunshot wound would have been 40 years ago. And I knew exactly what she was doing. And that for her, it's been 40 years of not knowing what happened to me. And that, just recently, last about July, when we found her, and then she got news that I had actually lived, that was her first knowing of what had happened to me, because when they sent me across the river to the South African side, they had no way of knowing what had happened to me. So she had just, her family had taken great risks to care for me. And so this was her first knowing in her body that I was okay and I had lived.
Was there any way you could tell her about your near-death experience?
Yes, we got to spend a great deal of time with her, and we did interviews, and so we had people who were translating back and forth, and that's an interesting part. I didn't so much get into the near death with her because partly because the challenge in the translating in terms of concepts about that, but we were really there to kind of get the context of the whole story, and so our focus was on more kind of the kind of literal facts of the story in terms of like, I was here, she found me here, this is what her family did, this is how her family hid me. So we did focus more on those things. But the great thing is I now have connections with the people who can do translations. And so I can, we've established this relationship, and we can continue to inform her, and she can answer more of my questions as they come up.
There's something about this story that, every once in a while it crosses my mind when I hear descriptions of the other side, why we're spending our time here at all. And then a story like yours reinforces my understanding of why we spend time here, what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and I think it's been writing it all down and in my manuscript that also helped me put that together, to see that I went from a very abusive family where I wasn't bonded and I wasn't receiving mothering, to being abducted, which was extremely traumatic, but then being taken in by this village. And the culture of it we have to shift our Western American thinking in terms of, we often have a family unit and children are very much connected just to their parents, and maybe some extended family. But it's a different concept in Africa that other people are raising your children. And in some traditions, literally when your child is young, the girl goes to the aunt or the boy goes to the uncle to be raised. So I realized their cultural notion of just taking a child in because I'm a child needing mothering was very strong. And that tradition that they have of, raising a child, even if it's not your biological child, is really the factor that saved my life. And then in writing my manuscript, my husband at one point came to me, and he's an amazing content editor, developmental editor, and he said to me, okay, you keep telling me about you're loved by these six beings you meet on the other side, but you're using the same words. Tell me how they were each different, and tell me, what was unique about the first being and the second being and the third being. And so I went back to work, and I really differentiated the unique factors of what they transformed in me, and just got beyond using the words love and embrace. And I handed it back to him, and he said, now I get it. Now I get that these beings were never going to let you go. They were going to receive you wherever you were at. Because when I first crossed over, I was resistant. I wanted to go back because I had finally found family in the people of this village.
Yes.
And I didn't want to be dead. And as beautiful as it was, I was resistant. And so I actually kind of went into a darker realm because that resistance needed to be worked through. And so what happened, each being met me where I was, moved me forward through that resistance, through that thinking I had to make it on my own, which is very understandable for being an 8-year-old who had survived what I'd survived, to helping me work through to receive greater and greater levels of love. And so by the end, my capacity to receive the magnitude of love that I was being offered by these beings was incredibly different than when I first crossed over. And so I think that
I was going to say, the being that you described as a bodhisattva who took you through into a cave and through a life review, was scary at first, but then you came to recognize how comforting and kind his intentions were.
Right. I never thought he was doing anything to me, because what was happening in this dark cave was all the screaming I had repressed when I was being abused in the U.S. All of a sudden that needed to be purified. So it was echoing off all the rocks. And every time I'd held back a facial expression when I was being abused, because that would make my abuse worse, that was in the cave. And so it very much was, by many people's definition, a hell realm. But it was my own self and my own emotion that I had repressed that I needed to bring home to myself. I needed to integrate back in so I could go forward as a whole being. So as difficult as it was, that bringing that pain and the anguish and myself home was really essential in being able to then receive greater amounts of love.
And that leap off the cliff, so dramatic and yet so liberating, I would think.
Right.
I have to remind the listeners that to get a more complete understanding of what you went through in your near-death experience, they should go back and listen to our first interview back in March. They can find it in our past shows. I wanted to ask you, too, about the being you described as a royal shepherd. Mm-hmm. And what tell us about that.
So especially with my perspective now, so I'll give listeners a little bit more context about my story.
Okay.
So I was in this village. I was being accepted and loved and cared for and being taught the singing. I was being taught how to listen to the song in the land because the ancestors are in the land, and to listen there for guidance on how to live, how to plant, how to be kind to another. And so there was and this is the benefit of going back to the actual location. So the village I was in, the group of huts I was in, was kind of protected on kind of 2.5 sides by a stone outcropping. And so it's a very held group of huts. So, but on the other side of that stone hill, there was a battle happened. And so I had wandered too far from the village that direction, and I was shot, and the bullet grazed the top of my head, and then I began to die of blood loss and shock. And so it kind of moving forward, I'll come back to that piece in the near death, but it was my one of the mothers that had been so good to me that found me and sang to me a calling song. She was calling me back with her medicine song. And her song, she called on the ancestors to join her in her singing. And so that made the song so powerful it crossed through the veils to where I was on the other side in death. And when I heard that song, I remembered my purpose was to also sing my medicine song to people. And I hadn't done that purpose, so I came back. And so what happened is they took me back to the village and put medicine on my head and did singing prayer for me. And I was recovering and still weak, but doing okay. But then the soldiers came back and attacked the village. And in my attempt to escape, I collapsed. And the interesting thing is, I have now allowed myself to remember that because I've allowed myself to remember more about the attack on the village. And this is a key point, that sometimes when we have trauma, there's also the gift in there. And that sometimes when we're most worn down and most broken open is when our strength, our potential is revealed. And so I had another near-death experience from collapsing then. And the painful part is that it looks like I'm the only survivor of that attack on the village. Mm. And so what was key in my first near-death experience, the first time I was shot, was that the first 2 women who greeted me were 2 black women that were very familiar, but I couldn't name. And I now realize that 2 days later, my 2 mamas were going to be killed. But they were already there greeting me in my first near-death experience before the attack on the village.
Oh, interesting.
So that is very interesting in terms of, our concepts around time and, what is our relationship with the other side and the future and what is the past, and
the possibility that we could be in both places at once.
Yeah, and I just had this realization. I think I gave my talk down in Arizona, and somebody asked me a question that kind of pressed me to really, really evaluate who those two women were, and I realized that, it was 2 days before their death, but they were already the ones greeting me when I had my death experience. And so,
I think you described them as older sisters at one point in our first interview.
Yeah.
And I thought, I wonder if they could have been older sisters from a previous life.
I have had an astrology reading where the person said that before this lifetime I've had very many tribal lifetimes, and that I had known what it was like to belong and to be part of, a very intact culture of village and tribe, and that it was kind of in this lifetime that I was experiencing abuse and where I didn't have a sense of belonging in family.
And you also mentioned that coming out of the place you were in where it was wet, you described it like Ireland, and I thought, well, there were tribal situations in Ireland in the past that you might have been a part of that as well.
Right, yeah, isn't that interesting? And so to fill readers in, kind of when I went into that darker realm because I was resistant to being on the other side, I kind of fell into a dark, into a stone stairwell that was very ancient. The steps were worn down, and the sky was dark, and it felt to me kind of what I would picture as Ireland on a kind of a dark day without much sunshine. And what's interesting is that I recently did my genetic DNA test, and I almost fell off my chair when the first report said Robin Lansong Irish, and never discussed in my family. Scottish was discussed, but never has anyone from my parents or grandparents ever said anything about Irish. So the fact that was a very large marker in my genetics was a big surprise to me.
Do you know the legends about the 10 northern tribes from Israel escaping from the Assyrians, crossing the Caucasus Mountains, and merging with the Indo-Europeans to become the Celts?
Oh.
There is evidence in Ireland and Scotland of David's harp, for instance, signs of the Hebrew culture having been transferred up to Ireland and Scotland. So it's a whole other story that we don't have to get into now. But
right.
your roots could go, back to the Middle East as well.
Right.
Now the royal shepherd.
Mm-hmm.
When you say something like that, it's almost a Jesus figure, and I thought I'd ask you more about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so my aim in writing my book is just to write my observations as a child and not put any of my adult interpretation. It's been a really interesting writing challenge to keep the language kind of within an 8-year-old vocabulary and 8-year-old perspective. And so I experienced this being he was, and the funny part is when I was writing about it, I thought, oh, this isn't very important. And my husband said, I think you're holding something back here. I want you to go write this down. And he would interview me. And so he said, well, what did he look like? And I said, well, he had a beard and he had a robe on that was kind of tan white, and it was a thick kind of felted fabric and kind of wide sleeves. And I said, and he had a sheep herder's staff with that curve at the top. And my husband looked at me and started smiling. I wasn't raised Christian. That wasn't really part of my upbringing. And I said, why? Is that somebody important? And he started laughing and said, the Lord is my shepherd. And I said, oh. And at that moment, I really got it of, I did see Jesus. That was Jesus. And that has been a real shift for me in consciousness and in relationship. And again, I'm writing the book in a way where I'm not naming it that, because I want everybody to have their own interpretation. Mm-hmm. And what was really heartening to me is I hired somebody from South Africa to do a round of edits on my book. And he wrote back to me and said, "You have just described this African pharaoh." And I said, "Perfect. That's exactly what I want." Everybody, I'm just stating what I observed, and everybody brings what's meaningful to them to the images.
You have put together a beautiful art book called Art Inspired by My Death Experience. And I wanted to ask you about, first of all, has your journey that you to Zimbabwe confirmed the art that you've drawn, or do you expect that it will change future drawings in any way?
Oh, that'll be interesting. Like I said, I've only been back 2.5 weeks, and I haven't done a drawing yet. My big project is to now integrate the facts and the details that I learned into the manuscript and to finish the epilogue. And so I haven't done a drawing yet. I'm imagining it won't really change my style too much, because that's been pretty consistent. But and so I don't do my drawings from a plan. I do my drawings from receiving instructions from divinity and bowing down, surrendering. So I can't really say ahead of time like what the drawing is going to actually be like. So I'd have to answer that for you after the next drawing I do.
Okay.
What was really just incredibly validating and helped me bring pieces of myself home was, while I was there, I got to be with other people who I had shared history with. And that, people in the U.S. can listen and be validating and supportive, but there I was with other survivors of the Rhodesian War. I was with people who knew exactly what I was talking about. And one of the moments we had Maya over for dinner, and there was another person who had helped find her and kind of make the connection to the story. And so through a translator, we were telling them about that I do this singing medicine. And it came about in the conversation because Cully, who went through the war, he said to the translator, "John, my husband, is influencing Robin." And I knew through translation what he meant was that he was energetically supporting me, kind of his masculine container was supporting me. And so that brought up for us about what happens when John and I do the singing medicine, and that it's this combination of masculine and feminine really relaxing in to allow divinity to sing through us. And so at dinner, we went ahead and stood up and did the singing medicine for them. And they smiled and they nodded and they said, "Yes, you got that from here. Culture."
Excellent.
Yeah, culture influenced you and you got that from here. And I thought, thank God, because I'm rather strange in America that I do the singing medicine. And for there, it's not strange at all. It's totally normal. And I could just feel my Zimbabwean self and my American self, that I'm both. And that even though I was there a short time, like around 2 months, it was so intense and so influential on me because it had so much trauma and so much love that, it was like 10 years of worth of experience packed into 2 months. And I'm 8 years old, so I'm the impression of who I am and my worldview is very strong at that time. And so they also told me that when the second family found me after the attack, that one of the really powerful kind of religious people who did singing prayer sang over me to help me heal and very much focused on me. And when I heard that, it was so validating. And I thought, he didn't just sing and heal the wound on my head. He wrote and he revealed my purpose and one of my strengths and one of my gifts. And he essentially activated that gift in me, as well as the mothers in the first village. So, Lee, I can hardly get across to you how much confidence I gained in who I am and that I make sense.
Well, your singing, the singing that I heard you do with John at the last IONS conference was very powerful, and I can understand why it would be so healing for people that need it. I would love to take you into the hospital where I'm a chaplain and just have you go from room to room singing to the people who need that.
Yeah.
That's
that's a powerful thing. And then just a note, just to talk about the IONS conference. That's it's the beginning of August.
Yes.
And John and I actually will be doing a singing medicine workshop that people can sign up for. It's in the workshop list. And I'm really looking forward to that. And it is limited to 20, so if people are interested to go, then it would probably be best to sign up for that soon.
Well, they certainly should. And it's too bad it's so limited, or that it can't be repeated, because it's powerful. It's really powerful. Yeah. In your first trip back to your body, and you do describe like a long tunnel going back, and this great heart, and the song that she was singing to you. That's a powerful description. Again, I'm telling the audience, go listen to our first interview, because they'll learn a lot about what we're talking about here right now.
Yeah, and that's been the beautiful part about writing it all down is I have an agent, and we have about 4 publishers interested. So we're on the cusp of these things still take a while, but we're on the cusp of getting a publisher and then me finishing the book, and it will be available at some point.
I will be astounded if this book does not lead to a movie, because it's such a powerful story, and it's so visual. Not only the story, but I mean the art that you've done that comes out of it. It would be it would make a perfect film, and it would be such a positive statement for belief in near-death experience. Mm-hmm. So I hope it goes that way. Tell me, just a quick aside, we're running out of time here, but tell me what turtles mean to you.
So I have the 2 turtle drawings that I've done so far, and so there's the creation story in different mythologies about that the world rests on the back of a turtle. Mm. And so the Mama Africa turtle drawing I have is that my world rested on her back. That, one of the women in the village who mothered me so much, that because I was so desperate for mothering and her capacity to give it was so big, I just really leaned my whole being into her. And Lee, here's the fascinating part. When we were at the location of where that first village was, and I got to bow down and do my prayers and give my thanks, and I felt the people of that village rush into me. And it was incredibly healing. And when we walked around the area, we went to a spot right across from the village where there were rocks that looked like the back of a turtle shell.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, and John looked at me and he pointed out, he said, "No wonder you draw turtles."
Wow. That's just one aspect of how this trip has completed the circle for you, isn't it?
Yeah. It was piece after piece fell into place. It was incredibly validating.
Wow. We are running close to the end of the show, and I want you to tell our audience how they can find your writings and your artwork, get your book, and so forth, and just follow your story. So why don't you tell them how to do that?
Yeah, so my website address is my name, Robin Landsong, and that's LANDSONG.com. And so there's pictures of my trip on there. There's a link to I have a video out on YouTube of the IONS conference of me telling my first ND there. And if people sign up on my newsletter at the bottom of any page of my website, then they will get notified of events and also when the book is ready.
Very good. And you have a workshop coming up in the next few days too, don't you?
Yeah, here I live in Olympia, Washington, and so it's going to be in Lacey, which is just a town over. And it'll be on Saturday at the St. Placid Priory, and people could go to my website or my Facebook page and get a connection to that. So if they're, around somewhere near Lacey, Washington, it's a day long, and it's really about helping people trust their mystical experiences, trust their spiritual experiences, because so often we don't have enough societal support to really drop into, what did that mean to me, and how can I cultivate seeing and noticing our different mystical moments.
I spend a lot of my time as a chaplain encouraging people to believe in what they've seen and experienced on the mystical side. Robin, thank you so much for being with us today. This was terrific. And to our listeners, if you'd like to listen again to this or any of our past shows, just go to our website at nderadio.org. For more information about the work of IANDS, check out that website, especially of the upcoming Denver conference at iands.org. And tune in next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.